All right. I believe we are live. Welcome, everybody. I am here with Chris Matakas. We're going to do a quick intro with him. I just want to double check that. I'm going to see the chat here. We got people joining in. Give people a few minutes to get into the call here. Boom, we'll turn that off. All right. We got some people coming in. If anybody that's watching the stream right now can just give me a quick holla, let me know you can hear me and see me okay. And then we'll get rocking and rolling here with Chris. All right. Just bear with me one sec there, Chris.
Sure thing. Take your time.
All right. Lee is here. He's saying, "Hey, David, good job on Oak Island." Oh, did you watch the new thing on History Channel? That's cool. All right. Mark Stecker, good day. All good. You're good, David. You're working. Sound and look good. Video and audio are excellent. That's what I want to hear. All right. We're ready to go here, buddy. So for those who are unaware, I'm going to put Chris up, but I'm going to read a little bio here for you. So if you're not aware of what he's done, what he's all about, I want you to get to know this gentleman. So Chris he's born in Trenton, New Jersey. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt under Ricardo Almeida. And anybody that knows Jiu-Jitsu or UFC or martial arts, you would have heard the name of Ricardo Almeida. And Chris writes a lot about how he believes the most fulfilling life is one spent mastering yourself and serving others. And Chris writes for buildthefire.com. He's written books such as The Tao of Jiu-Jitsu, which I'm currently reading and which is awesome. We're going to be talking about that today. He's also got 2 books on My Mastery, where he's using martial arts as his framework for a philosophy for living and achieving your potential. And then he's got one #human, learning to live in modern times. My God, we definitely need a manual on that. So Chris, my friend, thank you so much for joining me today on Truth Warrior, brother.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. Happy to be here.
So let's have some fun a little bit here, Chris. Before we get into the philosophy and the deep thinking, I want to talk a little bit about your specific, martial arts preferences. I mean, you're a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. First of all, have you studied any other martial arts, or is Jiu-Jitsu pretty much your foundation and that's what you focus on the most?
It's been primarily Jiu-Jitsu. So I fought amateur MMA very briefly and learned just enough to not get my head knocked off. But it's always been Jiu-Jitsu and grappling, and that's been my love.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, let's talk about your jiu-jitsu game. I mean, Ricardo Almeida, my God, what a wealth of knowledge it must be to study under him and also be surrounded by students of that caliber and people I'm sure that compete at a high level. I know you were saying in your book that you didn't really take the road of competition as much. You did competition, but it wasn't something that you focused too much on. You really liked the element of jiu-jitsu of just going in and mastering yourself, and you still feel like you grew by training with high-level competitors and things like that. I'm very similar. I mean, my degrees are in Japanese jiu-jitsu. I did receive a blue belt under Fabio Holenda and my original coach, Bill Gatchell out of Ottawa. But my main degrees are Japanese jiu-jitsu. I've done some kickboxing, some karate. But maybe just talk a little bit about what that was like, getting into jiu-jitsu, training with someone like Ricardo Almeida, and then your ideas on competition and sport jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very fortunate. So I graduated college in May of 2008. And then the week after I graduated, I took an intro class at Professor Almeida's. And it was just pure chance. I grew up on a road that's about 2 minutes from where he opened up his school. I didn't even know really what jiu-jitsu was. I didn't know who Ricardo Almeida was. And a friend encouraged me to try it out. He said he thought I would like it, and I went for it. And then that kind of became my life. After my first intro class, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I devoted my life to that. And I've been very fortunate to have, Professor Almeida is a brilliant mind, an incredible athlete, and the best teacher I've ever had. And he's ventured down jiu-jitsu further than anyone I know has ventured down anything. And it's been awesome to get to kind of, travel along in his coattails and try to get a good understanding of what this thing is, and just to have the opportunity to be surrounded by, Frankie Edgars and Edson Barbosas and Marlon Moraes and just world-class fighters, but more importantly, world-class human beings. It's been really cool to try to connect the dots as to what mastery is and how I can apply that in my own way to my own life.
Oh, that's incredible, man. Frankie Edgar, Edson Barboza. I mean, these are top-tier mixed martial artists, great fighters, and very well-rounded at their game.
Yeah.
And yeah, the disposition of those types of fighters, I think a lot of people get a feeling from martial artists and fighters in general that they're into violence, they're into fighting. They grew up on the street, so they just wanted to find a legal way to beat people up. But the
Yeah.
truth is, I've grown up training martial arts. I've trained with world champions. I've trained with very elite martial artists from different backgrounds. And I find it's quite the opposite, and especially with jiu-jitsu specifically, because jiu-jitsu focuses so much on skill and technique and using leverage and positioning and efficient movement to subdue an opponent, and not as much on striking, but essentially to shut down the striking game and get your opponent down to a position where they can't use so much kinetic energy, and you can isolate them and then focus on finishing the fight humanely. I find like jiu-jitsu practitioners specifically, but I wouldn't limit it to that, but I feel like in the jiu-jitsu community, there's a lot of a focus on just loving the art and having it as a personal development vehicle. And it's not as much as a focus of just going out and starting fights, but it's the idea of winning that internal fight, the inner fight that we all go through. What do you think about that?
Completely. I agree. I think, our culture does a lot of amazing things. We all stand on the foundation of everyone who came before us, and we really have the opportunity to pursue whatever we want and become whoever we want to be. But there is very little structure as far as personal development. And, once you get out of organized education, K through 12, you're kind of on your own. And for me, I recognize that. So I went to college to play football, and then 2 weeks in, shattered my ankle and couldn't play anymore. And there was this great void where I'd always used football as a vehicle for personal development, and then I no longer had that. And as soon as I graduated college, I knew I needed something again. And jiu-jitsu, to my mind, it's the universal tool for personal development. I mean, when you think about it, it trains your body, your mind, and your spirit. And I know a lot of things that train my body. I can go to the gym and work out, but your soul kind of atrophies, right? Certainly you're not challenging your problem solving ability. Or, depending your religion, you can sit in church and your soul can be filled, but your body wastes away. And I just think jiu-jitsu has done an amazing job of creating an atmosphere where you have the community, you have the place to purposefully suffer, you have an opportunity to daily solve problems in the most difficult way, and everyone presents a new problem. And that's a rare gift. And I think for all of us, the further we progress in this art, the further our humanity progresses as well.
I totally agree, and I'm glad you brought that up. Well, let's get into some of your game, your jiu-jitsu game. So, like, give me an idea of, the difference between your game and the game that, you would learn from someone like Ricardo Almeida. I'm sure you've learned so many great techniques and trained with many different jiu-jitsu players, and you must have developed your own game of what you prefer. We all do that. So, like, what's your favorite kind of guard? What's your favorite kind of bottom submission? What's your favorite kind of top submission? Those kinds of things, if you wouldn't mind sharing with people.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I play a lot of sitting up butterfly guard. I love butterfly guard. I've always felt most comfortable there. And on top, just tight, grinding, smash passing, basically getting hip to hip, chest to chest, and being shrink wrapped to the point where you're just moving inch by inch and not allowing your partner to get that inch back. And I've always found the most joy in that. As far as submissions, you take whatever is presented to you. I guess I definitely have an affinity for chokes and kimuras. I've had the opportunity, very fortunate, being around Professor Almeida. You get the best guys in the area that all flock to him. So I've gotten to train a lot with Gordon Ryan, Gary Tonin,
Wow.
and learn leg locks right from that system. And those guys are incredible. So I guess I've been very fortunate to kind of dabble in everything. But for me, it's always been have an impassable guard and then just get as good as you possibly can at tight, grinding guard passing. Doesn't necessarily rely on athleticism, but just relies on patience. Professor Almeida would always talk about the idea of, you want to be able to fight on a desert island. If there's just two of you there, no matter how long the fight takes, can you win? And for me, that's what I think good guard passing is. Like, you need to be willing to almost be bored, where I'm chest to chest and I'll take 30 minutes to finally free that leg without ever giving anything up. And I've always just found a lot of joy in just simply guard passing. It's a war of attrition, and it's always been my favorite part of jiu-jitsu. And it's really hard to get injured when you're guard passing. And as we train a lot and the miles accrue, you try to look for ways where, how can I train in a way that's sustainable? Because I just opened up my own school and I want to be able to do jiu-jitsu, for as long as I'm alive. So I've got hopefully 70 more years of this. So I need to do it in a way where I can maximize my time on the mat and minimize injury. And I think guard passing is the bread and butter for that.
Oh, a great answer. I totally agree with you. I mean, I've been training a variety of martial arts, a lot of the hard styles like striking where my main focus is. And then in Japanese jiu-jitsu, there's a lot of wrestling and judo. So you're getting slammed on the mat a lot. There's a lot of wrist locks and like striking pressure points, and it's very grinding. And then now I'm focusing a lot on my jiu-jitsu. I'm training with Matt Kaiser, Kaiser Jiu-Jitsu out of Victoria, BC. He's got tons of credentials out of submission-based wrestling, where a lot of grapplers go into that, and then you'll get your sambo guys in there and your wrestlers in there. So he's seen a lot of different kinds of grappling styles and grappling arts. And I hear what you're saying about the tight top game and the butterfly guard. I also got an opportunity to train with Mark Bocek, who's a Canadian, UFC fighter, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu 3rd degree black belt. He trains under he trains under Marcelo Garcia. And Marcelo Garcia is famous for the seated butterfly guard to, the single ashigarami to X guard and all that, taking the back. And once they're on your back, you're not getting them off kind of thing. So I totally have appreciation for that. And I do feel like it allows you to have some longevity. And for those that aren't familiar with jiu-jitsu, could you maybe explain the process of jiu-jitsu? There was an excellent interview on Joe Rogan's podcast with John Danaher, who's the coach.
The best I've ever heard.
Yeah. Wasn't that great? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically it, right? So I love his use of kinetic energy, and David used that earlier in this conversation. I mean, that's it. So jiu-jitsu is, the gentle art meant for the smaller, less physically imposing individual to safely subdue another. And that means you need to minimize the ability to produce kinetic energy. And like you said, I haven't heard anyone describe it like Danaher did, which makes perfect sense. And I think that's our job, right? If you're in an altercation, you want to get the fight to the ground. As he said, get past the legs, safely control them with a pin until ultimately ending the altercation with a joint lock. And I would include the neck in that, right? Taking some aspect of their body away from their center of mass. Right. But, conversely, I've also heard Jocko Willink, who I'm a big fan of, talk a lot about the idea that in jiu-jitsu and self-defense, you're not trying to teach the average person to take somebody down. You're trying to teach the average person to be able to stand back up once they've been taken down, once they've tripped over a bar stool, whatever that might be. Right. So we always use the term distance management for punch control. And there's a big distinction between sport jiu-jitsu and self-defense jiu-jitsu. Right. And I think that's paramount. And I think, in general, probably we all get caught up in a sport jiu-jitsu a little too much relative to the population we're serving. So I look at my school and we maybe have a couple guys that want to compete, but most of us just want to use this as a tool for personal development and as a means of self-defense. So, maybe learning back takes from reverse De La Riva guard isn't as practical as learning how to defend punches in the closed guard. Right. And I think that's a big distinction. We kind of, as a population, can probably do a better job of addressing the needs of the individuals we serve.
Yeah, that's really key. I bring this up all the time. Coming from Japanese jiu-jitsu, my grappling game, to be honest, was my weakest element because we didn't spend as much time developing the chess match version, the competitive version, all the ground fighting in Japanese jiu-jitsu, which is where you got Brazilian jiu-jitsu, because the Gracies took the Japanese judokas and the stuff that they learned and just sort of adapted it a little bit more. But the idea was you're dealing with somebody that's trying to kill you or knock you out. And if you're a smaller person, the best way to do it is, as you said, distance management. You're either on the outside trying to escape, or you're really, really tight and putting pressure and putting them into a position where strength counts for nothing. And then you're using technical proficiency to manage the outcome and finish the fight. But, there is that feeling, and you get it from Rickson Gracie right now. He's been talking a lot about how, he's all for competition, and it's good that jiu-jitsu players are developing their game in an advanced way against people that know jiu-jitsu, which would be the competitors. But then we forget about the importance of self-defense and training that spirit of just fortitude in people so that they know for a fact that if an altercation ever took place, they can handle themselves. And just that confidence alone, I think from white to blue belt, is so important to formulate right off the bat. And then, we can continue training that stuff and then add in the chess game and the more deeper scientific elements of the art of jiu-jitsu. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. You bring up the chess game, and that's an important distinction. It's funny when you get into, say, what we'll call higher level sport jiu-jitsu. And when you're training with someone of equivalent skill, that layered chess game arises where, you do something, they counter back and forth, and it goes on in perpetuity. But it's funny when You do that against, say, an uninitiated white belt, it's incredibly less effective, because so much of what we do in that chess match, it requires a high level reaction.
Mm.
And if someone can't give you that high level reaction, you're sometimes just kind of on an island. Whereas, like you said, white to blue belt, I think that's the bread and butter. Because if we're going to use this as a tool for personal development, our goal should be to get people to blue belt. Because if we can get them the blue belt, they're probably not going to quit, or they're certainly less likely to. So we've been really purposeful about that, trying to just, archetype a plan where how can we as efficiently get someone from white to blue belt in a way where they understand, a broad idea of techniques, and really give them the understanding to know that they can use jiu-jitsu as a tool for personal development however they want to in their own life. Our academy's tagline is where we pursue individual goals as a collective. And I think that's what we're doing, because we have some guys that want to compete, some moms that want to lose weight, some guys that want to learn self-defense. Some people just want a great community, because the secular world hasn't really done a great job of providing healthy communities. And I think that's something that jiu-jitsu has done an extraordinary job of. So yeah, I think it's a really great, valuable thing we do, and I'm very fortunate that we get to be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is important. And let's maybe move in now to talking about sort of the philosophical angle. If anybody knows me or watches this show, they know that is what I'm all about. I actually got interested in martial arts first by reading books. So I was a kid, I would go to the library and take out books, on just different martial art masters writing their thoughts about it. And all the books had, the techniques in it. Like if I could think of that Hideo Che practical self-defense book, came out in like the 80s or something, or the Bruce Lee books, or the, some of the karate masters that have their kata books. There was always these sections in the back that a lot of people skipped over. And those sections were these masters writing about the philosophy of martial arts. It's sort of the esoteric side of the martial art practice. And this is what you're bringing out in your books, the Tao of Jiu-Jitsu and other books, which is that this is a vehicle towards learning how to be successful in life. Not just financially, I mean, that could apply, but also just in your pursuit of happiness, your pursuit of well-being, your pursuit of trying to find meaning in your life, learning how to think more objectively, learning how to work with other people, learning how to deal with adversity, all of these great things. And there's a passage from your book, a quick little bit I just wanted to read to give people an idea. I really loved it, where you were saying that jiu-jitsu has given me something to pursue. We all need something to work towards. For people as well as every piece of matter in the universe, there's no such thing as just maintenance. If you're not growing, you're decaying. The insidious nature of modern times is that it is so easy not to pursue anything. Societal norms pressure us into jobs we do not like, and the daily comforts of televisions, computers, which offer much of a way of distraction. And I really think that that's a key point to bring up, is that in our current culture right now, taking the easy, quick way out is just offered to you on a platter. Everything is fast food. Download the app, go here and buy this product, and you'll be happy. But we're finding that, look at the rate of depression. Look at the rate, especially in young people, the rate of that feeling of malcontentness, and people that are not succeeding. They're not given the tools to succeed in life and be happy. So they're going to get pharmaceutical drugs or other drugs to try to fill that void. Whereas something like jiu-jitsu, because it encompasses movement as well as thinking, you're connecting the mind and body together, and you're learning about how to go from being completely incompetent at something to being very proficient and very competent at something. And that skill can translate well into other areas of life. So give me your comments on that, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the best things jiu-jitsu has done is it can teach you how to learn. And I don't know about you, it's amazing. I didn't really learn how to learn until I started jiu-jitsu. And I went to a good high school, I went to a good college, but just the structured approach to skill acquisition is not something I ever experienced. And getting to pursue that under Professor Almeida has been an absolute gift, because then I could start to make those corollaries everywhere else. And I noticed that as soon as I started jiu-jitsu, I really started diving into philosophy, and it was like my mind kind of turned on. And to see that my growth in one area, like the better my guard passing got, the more I understood the book later that night when I was reading, because it was just all connected.
Right.
And I think it's invaluable. So I'm working on another book right now about teaching, which I'm super pumped for, because I just wrote a book, 5 Rules for White Belts. It should be out maybe next month, I believe. And now I'm doing the opposite end of the continuum. So we have the white belt and then the teacher. And I think we we are incredibly fortunate to the fact that we possess, like, we are the stewards of this art. And it's something that, like you said, can change anyone's life because it's so easy to do the easy thing. And it's so easy to do the wrong thing. And it takes a lot of effort to daily strive to bettering yourself because each day you start anew. And it's so easy to fall by the wayside, and the subtle little course corrections along the way, where if you're 1 degree off each day, before you know it, you're on a completely different road. And
Right.
jujitsu keeps you honest because you can't have a bad day of eating if you're going to train that night. And when you get whooped on the mat, you can't leave the academy thinking that, you're the man and you have a myopic view of the world, because it's also humbling. And then I think the biggest thing is the tacit teaching of kindness, because when you think about it, when we're doing live training, especially in a good community where you're taking people to the brink of, say, a choke, which, might as well be death, or a joint lock, and you're in a position of power and you're choosing to use empathy and be kind and not inflict damage on that individual. And I think when people get daily reps in that, all of a sudden, maybe, when you're a boss at work, you're probably a little bit more empathetic and kind when you're in a similar position, but say in the office or in your relationships. You're probably a little bit more aware of what the other is going through and what the other is thinking, because jiu-jitsu is an empathic sport. And, you don't get a lot of empathy from watching Netflix at night and stuffing your face with bad food. But you get it very quickly when you are the steward guiding a white belt to understand something as simple as, say, a scissor sweep, or when you're in a really heated training match with one of your close friends, a peer, and you forego the submission in hopes of not hurting their body, in crazy scrambles and those sorts of things. And that is an invaluable skill that we don't get in common culture that jiu-jitsu provides, that I haven't really found anywhere else.
Very well said. That was perfect. I actually have. Oh, I'm just getting a little bit of feedback there, Chris. Maybe if you turn your end down a little bit, it could be that. Just the volume, I think. It's just me bouncing off the walls in there. So there's a comment on what you were saying there by Diana Sunshine Wolf. She was saying, this is very inspiring. Children in school need this. Teachers should instill this practice in gym classes. Have you ever worked in taught martial arts in schools? And what do you think about having that, something like jiu-jitsu, implemented in schools so it could become like a regular activity in gym class for kids to study?
I think that's the next evolution. I believe it was Kano who did that with judo and
Right.
completely revitalized their whole education system. And I think that's the next move. You can play sports, and sports are wonderful tools for personal development as well. But I think probably a lot of the activities in gym class are certainly less efficient than jiu-jitsu would be. And it is amazing the progress you see with kids. I love teaching kids. We have as early as probably 3.5. And they don't have to unlearn all the things that you and I have to learn, where they can make daily consistent progress to a really extraordinary degree. And it's amazing if you can there's a great quote. I think it was maybe Friedrich Douglass who said, it's easier to build great children than it is to fix old men, something along those lines.
Makes sense.
And that's what we're doing. And just to talk about that empathy thing, I had a great talk with one of our young students last night about taking care of our partners. And they understand it so clearly that the next moment, the next, minute of live training, they're a completely different individual. All of a sudden they went from competitive, crazy, full of energy to caring about their partner. And we've done a really good job of having a character development curriculum where we teach jiu-jitsu, and it's good jiu-jitsu, and I love it. But we've now added a monthly exercise where this month, for example, the kids have to eat a fruit or a vegetable every day. And if they do, they get a character stripe. And we've done so far 20 random acts of kindness, which was the coolest thing because we had kids arguing over who has done more kind acts that day. And man, that's it, right? That's what we're trying to do. That's the goal. And I just think if we could give every kid the opportunity to benefit from something like this, the world would be a much different place.
Oh, good for you, man. It's so important that the young are taken care of in this way because they're being neglected in so many ways by our society, even in this hyper helicopter parenting world. It's almost having a bad, like an opposite effect. And where a lot of the schools are sort of starting to really micromanage these children. And aside from education system rants, if we think about what type of education children do need, the most, and adults as well. But if we focus on children,
Mhm.
they need a foundation of self-esteem. They
Yeah.
need a foundation of what is healthy psychologically, what is healthy physically, what is healthy spiritually, how to interact with people with empathy, as you said. And that's a great point you brought up earlier about how specifically the jiu-jitsu, even though you're sort of in a friendly way, you're torturing each other with these techniques, right? And you're putting all this pressure and, shoulder of justice in the face and then grabbing a kimura or whatever. Like the fact that you are learning control, you're learning about your power, you're learning about the potential danger of another opponent that is also trying to do the same thing to you. The fact that you're not punching and striking each other, although you're training them for those scenarios, but you're not like full out trying to knock people out in the training mats.
Yeah.
It's a practical way of dealing with the problem without building this, the idea that, I'm just going to go out and beat the snot out of people.
Yeah.
And it's a very humane way of doing it, in my opinion. And you're learning that empathy that is so key. So you get self-esteem, empathy, health. I mean, you're promoting health by doing that. I teach children as well, and I find the same thing is very effective. And when they're training and they want to, they're coming in and they want to show off for you. You're the instructor. You're like their older brother, and they want to be like, look at me, look what I can do. And when they look up to you like that, that's a serious responsibility to have and to be in. And as an instructor, you have to have that humility and to know like, hey, they're watching me. I have to be a good example. So it makes you a better person too. And when they see, like, I'm always walking on the mat, I'm drinking a green smoothie, or I'm eating an apple all the time while I'm teaching. And I'm just trying to always show through my own actions. And then I tell them, like, if you want to train at a better pace and you want to get your next belt, or you want to go to a tournament and win, and you want to feel good about yourself, you got to eat those apples. You got to eat that fruits and vegetables, get your water in your system, So this is such a key component. Well, how would you comment as an instructor in your own personal development, being an instructor? Could you say a bit more on that?
Yeah, like you said, you are forced to hold yourself to a very different standard. And I think teaching is the best thing we can do to serve those around us, but it's really the best thing we can do for us. We are pack animals, and we want to carry a load. And I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson, who has recently become very popular.
Nice.
I've listened to all of his lectures. I'm struggling mightily through his first book, Maps of Meaning. And it's absolute gold. And he talks a lot about that idea that the more responsibility you adopt, the more meaning you will have in your life. And I can't think of a more meaningful thing than to adopt the responsibility of trying to serve your community in a positive way. And that means you have to start with yourself. You have to hold yourself to a different standard. So when I have a family someday, in our dining room will be a quote. It will be, I'll become a better me for you if you become a better you for me. And I've always, really held on to that idea, because if I slack, right, say maybe I watch Netflix at night instead of reading a book, I will be worse. And then tacitly, just a little bit, everyone else around me will be a little bit worse. And on a day-to-day basis, those little things add up. And before you know it, you didn't have the positive impact on the world that you can. So teaching forces you to pursue the best version of yourself out of love for other people. So it's great for them, but really we're the ones that benefit the most from it.
Oh, so well said. And it's funny you bring up Jordan Peterson. I mean, I'm a big fan as well. He's Canadian, and he's hit the headlines on some controversial topics, but it's so funny that that's sometimes what it takes. You get attention. And then when people were getting past just looking at, certain political issues he was bringing up, and, some of the hate speech laws and all that were coming in, one thing that started happening was people were going to watch his lectures. And a lot of what he's talking about in his lectures of comparing religion and mythology and psychology and bringing in like Jungian psychology into some of it, and some of Nietzsche and Freud, was that you're getting this, you're getting basically a really deep intellectual version of what we're trying to do in martial arts. We're trying to tell people, stop whining, stop pointing fingers at everybody else, stop being the victim. Don't live in a victim mindset. It's going to bring you nothing but disaster. Try to get the wind under your own sails, become an individual. All the greatest, religious texts, even, we're trying to talk to you about the divine concept of what it is to be a fully realized self, so that you can go and empower others and have a cohesive, peaceful, harmonious, and prosperous community. And think about what we're doing in jiu-jitsu and martial arts in general, and any martial artist that's out there listening, that's instructing. I mean, it's all good because you're trying to empower people to learn how to face adversity, develop some fortitude, get some courage, confidence, self-esteem, health, wellness. Those are the kind of people that will build a very harmonious and prosperous and peaceful community and society. And that's what will shape a better world. So could it be said, Chris, that jiu-jitsu might just be able to save the world? I mean, is that crazy or what?
I love it, David. I think it can definitely improve the world. And I remember the Dalai Lama said something like, if you taught this generation to meditate, in 20 years, there'd be no more world wars. And you could say the same thing for jiu-jitsu. Going back to Jordan Peterson in his biblical series, I think it was lecture 7 about Noah and the flood. And he interpreted that story as, you want to be the guy or be the woman who builds the ark when the flood comes, because the flood is coming. No matter how well appointed your life is, chaos is always knocking at the door. And that's something that the daily practice of jiu-jitsu shows, because you are daily forced to solve unique problems under extreme stress.
Right.
And what better skill set for a elementary school kid, right? What better skill set for someone going through high school and getting ready to go to college? And what better skill set for all adults who are, what we'll call in the real world, who are daily facing the unknowns in the subtlest of ways, but have no real conceptual framework with which to approach those unknowns. And I think that's what jiu-jitsu does. It teaches you not only that you're not made of glass, but that you are capable of daily improvement, because we see it, because we get immediate feedback. Your bad habits in your daily experience may take years to kill you, but a bad habit in jiu-jitsu gets me choked every night. And that immediate feedback just allows you to constantly course correct and to find that most optimal path. So I think it's something that maybe it could save the world. It would certainly improve it greatly.
That's great. And I mean, that's true. The course correction and the immediate feedback. I've often compared martial art training to having a scientific lab where you could perform experiments, get that feedback, and then do your course correction. And for those that are into personal development or spirituality or just self, exploration in general, there's something extremely unique about martial arts. We had a comment here from Marcel, who is saying that all art is changing the world. Absolutely, Marcel. I definitely get the point, the art. But there is something unique about martial arts in that you are studying combat, conflict, problem solving, strategy, and dealing with constant pressure. So the pressure that you're getting from some opponent in jiu-jitsu, that's really just like a mirror reflection of you trying to give you that feedback, is like the kind of pressure you might get from something in your mind that's developed, like depression or an anxiety or like an irrational fear. Or maybe you're afraid to go and speak out in public about something you're passionate about, or to approach someone that is doing something that's wrong. Or just, in everyday activities, we're silent because we're afraid of what other people are going to think about us. Yeah. And in jiu-jitsu, there's not really any room for that, because everything's fair on the mats. Like, you could be, one day you're grappling with some scrawny accountant and he's choking the hell out of you, and the next minute you're with some, police officer or some wrestler or, some MMA fighter, or, and then the next day it's with some guy that's managing the crosswalk at school. And you're getting to know all these people in a way that you normally don't. Like, nobody walks up and just starts touching people and grabbing an arm drag and hugging. Like, I always tell my kids, I'm like, who knew that hugging could save your life? Who knew that hugging somebody was so effective as a self-defense technique? And that might answer someone's question who was asking, what's the best martial art for practical self-defense? Learning how to hug efficiently is the best martial art. What do you think?
I agree completely. Learning how to hug efficiently. I love that.
But like, to your point about like, how we're learning how to manage it, and you have this ability to get that feedback. Would you relate that to the process of exploring consciousness and exploring that path of self-discovery, where we all have our inner demons, we all have the skeletons from the past, we all have things that haunt us? A lot of people have had traumatic experiences happen or are in traumatic environments right now. And would you say that the process of getting better at jiu-jitsu is really very similar to the process that you need to do to get better at managing your own psychological needs?
Absolutely, completely. So we were talking about Jungian psychology, and I'm a big Joseph Campbell fan too.
Oh, fantastic.
Right.
Jeez, we're going to get along great, dude.
Absolutely. And, Joseph Campbell was an exponent of Carl Jung. And basically Jung said that you need to go where you're most afraid to go. And Joseph Campbell put it in a great way. The cave you fear to enter holds a treasure that you seek.
Right.
And jujitsu is exactly like that, because we can stay in our areas of competence and not really grow. But say you're training with a stud dude who you can do X, Y, and Z, and it's probably going to work most of the time, but they're not getting better. You need to have the courage and the humility to try skills you've not yet acquired so that you can acquire them. Meaning you have to go into that cave where you don't want to go because you're going to get whooped for a while. And then you find that treasure that you seek. So I think it is a perfect parallel to what we do internally and emotionally every day. It's funny. I've had an amazing opportunity to get to officiate a lot of my close friends' weddings, which has
Oh,
been
wow.
incredible.
Good for
Yeah.
you.
The first one that asked me was one of my really good friends, one of my teammates, Rob Cook, fantastic black belt. And I remember we were riding our bikes through the park, and he asked me, dude, will you marry Gabby and I? And I remember I had that instantly scared, terrified feeling like in my core. And I knew, all right, that's what I have to do. So I've just always pursued that feeling. If something scares me, it means I do not yet have the strength that would make that an easy skill. So if it scares me, I have to do it to acquire the strength to grow.
That's awesome. That's profound, because that's what's happening right now is a lot of people are afraid to address the dark side of what's going on internally and also externally. I mean, there's one thing that I cover on the show is sort of taking a look at what's happening in society, what's happening in the world, and not just looking at it in this fear and doom and gloom kind of sense, but to look at it like you're trying to fix it. There was a great quote, I believe it was Eric Fromm or someone of that caliber, who was saying that, it's frightening to look at the ills of man, but when you do, you will become well. So once you look at the problem and once you face your fear, then okay, now I just need to find the right plan of action of how to overcome this obstacle or how to face up to this. And that's the step that is very hard to take. And then when we have a culture and society right now where everything's so easily handed to you on a platter, every 2 seconds you have an ad up in your face. Hey, this will make you happy. This will make you happy. This will make you happy. And yet so many people are unhappy. We have all these things, which are great, but like, it's not bringing happiness. It's not bringing eudaimonia, like the way the Greeks used to talk about it, where it was like, no, this is you're fulfilling your role as a human being. You're not walking around lost. Like, I don't know who I am, where I am, or where I'm going, but I don't care. I'm just going to go along to get along. Like, that's not producing happiness. So if our goal is to live happy, fulfilled, and free lifestyles, then for me, the martial arts is it's the fastest entry level program to go into in terms of getting what you need, where you're practicing in a safe environment with people that are on the same journey as you. They're just at different stages. You're sharing that process together. And I'm hoping that more professors and senseis and sifus out there are teaching the philosophy that goes with the martial arts as well, to empower people. They're not just, hey, come on in and I'll show you the fastest way to kill somebody in 10 seconds, or we'll go to the next tournament and we'll clean house. That's fine. But if that's the only focus, we're not going to move forward individually or collectively. So what do you think about that, Chris? In your experience, I'm sure you've rolled in a lot of gyms, seen a lot of people come and go. You don't have to name any names if you don't want to, but have you seen this sort of dichotomy in the martial art world where you've got a lot of great instructors like Ricardo Almeida and Marcelo Garcia and so many other great ones that are trying to empower people on holistic levels, versus the sort of, let's go in there, win, compete, crush everybody, kill. Like, how's your experience been in that regard?
Yeah, I've had a very narrow channel of education. So like I said, I started my first intro class with Professor Almeida, and he's been my only teacher ever. So I've only ever really come up in that school. Having said that, we've had a lot of people come from other schools. And there's always a stark contrast where, we talk about our job is to unlearn a lot of things where kids can just learn and grow a lot faster. So much so where new guys come in and they have to unlearn a lot of bad habits and a lot of modes of being where they may never pick up what, say, like a Professor Almeida is putting down. So I've been very fortunate where I just stumbled into a great situation and, had the presence of mind to make the most of it. But there is, I think, as teachers, we are doing a disservice if we do not talk about the philosophy and the personal development, because even a dedicated student who, say, trains, every other day, every week, every month, every year consistently, they're probably only at jujitsu for what, 5, 6 hours a week, but
Mm,
they're living their lives the rest of that time. And if we're not giving them the education or the framework to take the lessons on the mat and apply them everywhere else, then yeah, we're turning them into better fighters, but most of them will never actually be in a fight. So I'm not really sure how valuable that practice is, as opposed to giving them the education to say, hey, you being mounted is the same exact thing as you being overwhelmed at work. And
mm.
here's what we do to get out of it. That's the difference that really can save the world, as you so well put it, for jujitsu's sales force, which we are.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thanks. I want to say thanks to Synonym. Can never say that. He was correcting me on the quote. It was Vernon Howard that said it. Human sickness is so severe that few can bear to look at it, but those who do will become well. Thanks, buddy. And Vernon Howard is the best, he says. Yes, I recommend reading him. I got an interesting series of quotes from Dragon's Temple. He's saying, wait, I got to scroll back. He said, to clarify, when I began jujitsu and MMA, the school I went to, they essentially ignored the new people like me. My MMA prospects ended when the 25-year-old instructor broke my arm when he had full control. The second gym I went to, I didn't break my arm, but still ultimately got ignored by just like all the other new people. He said we had a 20-minute warm-up, 5-minute actual technique, 30 minutes of sparring. He's I couldn't even figure out what I was doing wrong. Have you heard of this? This is very common in a lot of martial arts schools.
Yeah, we've had a lot of students come in from other schools who have said, I have never learned jiu-jitsu like this. It's so accessible. It used to be just king of the mountain, and if you survive, you get good. But there was no real structure behind the education. So I've always followed the same blueprint that Professor Almeida has, where we have, the same warm-up every day. We have the same structure of classes where, say, it's, one self-defense technique, one takedown technique, 2 to 3 on the ground, some purposeful positional training, a nice cool down, an end of class message where we tie it all together. Here's how you can use this at home or at school, and then live training afterwards. And, I've had a lot of students say that's just not what they are offered when they go to other schools. They don't feel welcome. They sometimes don't feel safe. Like the comment of our one viewer who said they got his arm broken. Like, that's terrible. Our job is to serve, our students. We shouldn't be using our students to serve our ego or our own false agendas. And yeah, I mean, it's a shame because it is such a ripe tool for personal development. And really, the students are at the mercy of the teacher. So back to what we were talking about a little while ago, it's the teacher's responsibility to articulate what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it. And I think it's the teacher's responsibility to make everyone feel welcome, because that's not a very common thing in our culture. We're so screen-based and isolated that we've lost that fellowship. And for a lot of people, I think that's the biggest draw to jiu-jitsu once they're in it. They may come for self-defense, they may come for weight loss, but the way we make them feel is why they stay, because they feel welcomed and safe and wanted. There's an old saying, everyone has a sign on their chest, make me feel special. And we should be that for everybody. And that's our job as teachers, because jiu-jitsu is incredibly demanding. It takes a special individual to daily work toward this goal, to suffer purposefully, especially all the way through to a black belt. But anybody, any white belt who could be sitting at home on the couch is choosing to come suffer. You need to acknowledge that choice as an instructor, and you need to make sure that their reasons for not coming have nothing to do with the culture you're providing, because there are so many barriers to entry already. We don't want to add barriers to entry just by being, unloving or unkind.
Man, that was perfect. I'm so glad you addressed that, because I have had the same experience. Students coming in and telling me that, day one I had to roll through the shark tank of all their black belts, and I'm like, what the hell? You need to inspire people, not force feed people. It kind of reminds me of that. Remember the first Transformers movie where I can't remember which Transformer it was, but he was the police car, and on the side it said to punish and enslave, because bad guy, and it's like, you can be the sensei that's there to serve and protect, or you can be there to punish and enslave. And it seems to be on both sides of it. And this is just, it goes back to, if you're getting into the deep psychology, the sort of master slave dynamic that happens in unhealthy consciousness, where people either they're dying to become a slave to some tyrant, right? Or they're trying to become a tyrant and enslave other people. There's not a relationship. There's not a fair giving and receiving. There's not an instructor-student relationship or any of these kinds of things. What it is it's a very tyrannical, I tell you what to do and you do it. I tell you to jump, you ask how high, you don't question me. And what ends up happening, and this is just kind of the dark side of martial arts or any activity you have to talk about, is some of these instructors, they're showing a lot of sociopathic kind of tendencies. And we hear a lot about sort of the molestation that happens and some of the crazy stuff that happens. And this is something I was just having a conversation about with one of my coaches, where he was just telling me about some of the experiences that he's had, hearing about some of these instructors using that ability to grapple somebody, but in a very malicious way. And, it's just these kinds of predators will seek places where light shines so that they can be aggressive in that environment and do what they want to do. And martial arts is a key place for that. And I do see that, where a lot of these people will find it as a playground for them, because if they can have even people just believe that they're a black belt that knows what they're talking about, even if they're not, they're in a position of power over other people. And you're teaching people how to be in a position of power. But the thing is you're not really teaching people how to be in a position of power over other people. You're actually teaching them how to become powerful themselves, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. There is a lot of maliciousness out there, and there's primarily wonderful, amazing human beings, but there are some bad ones out there. And I'm a big reader, as are you, and I'm a big fan of Plato's Republic. And for me, the big takeaway was those who lead should lead out of civic duty, not because they really want to necessarily. Like, if you want to be the leader and have all eyes on you and be at the top of that competence hierarchy to serve your own ill nature, you're kind of missing the point, because we are all weak in our own unique ways. And our job, when we ascend that competence hierarchy to the point where you are the instructor or the head instructor or the owner of a school, you have a responsibility to be the least important person in the room. You are there for everybody else. And when you're there to have those people serve your ego or your false needs or whatever it might be, you're missing the point. You're doing a disservice to them. And you're providing someone an atmosphere in which not only are they missing out on the opportunity to experience what jiu-jitsu is, how we've experienced it, but you're making someone's life harder. And life is hard enough. Our job is at least to be neutral, but we should really be trying to strive to make everyone else's lives a little bit easier, a little bit better. Maybe not easier, a little bit more better and purposeful. And I think that's our job as an instructor. We need to lead out of a sense of service, and we need to know what each individual needs and provide them the atmosphere they need so that they can most optimally grow. And that's something a little different for everybody, but it usually all stems around, I'm here for you, I love you, how can we grow together? That kind of usually sums it up.
Yes, I agree. And it's kind of funny when you say our job is to make them easier, and then you backtrack. I'm thinking, well, technically we're trying to make it harder, but there's good hard and bad hard. There's good pain, bad pain. If you're getting injured, that's bad pain. If you're rolling with someone and they're just being a jerk to you, that's not what we're talking about. Harder in the sense that it's legitimate suffering, as a lot of the psychologists would have talked about it. There's a legitimate process of suffering that needs to happen in order for full wholeness of thinking can occur, or enlightenment or whatever, right? And even a lot of the old practices coming out of, say, ancient Egypt, or a lot of these ancient esoteric traditions, they would have put you through trials. Or even the natives, they'd have the kids go off and you have to survive in the woods for a week. And then if you survive, well, then now you're a man and you're a warrior and all this stuff. Today, we don't really have that process. We're coddling everybody so much that we're becoming weak. And look at men today. Where are all the men? Where are all the true, strong, empowered, virtuous men, the warriors of old, the men you could trust, the men that built civilization, and women as well. We could talk about that too. But just this idea that there's a legitimate form of suffering, this is very key.
Yeah. And as you said, easy isn't the right word. We don't want to make your life easier. We want to make you stronger. So
there you go. Nice.
You're relative to your abilities. But you're right. We have no rite of passage. We don't have that in our culture. And I know for me, I had to seek it out. When I graduated college, I guess it would have been 21, 22. I still felt like a boy. And now I was in, the adult world, but I wasn't an adult yet. So I found jiu-jitsu, and I recognized that this was the baptism I needed. This was the rituals and the rites of passage to create an environment of purposeful suffering so that you can become more and can become stronger. And without that, we would be a society of boys. I know I can, and I don't only speak anecdotally to my own development and what I've observed around me, but I know that without my experiences on the mat and, daily suffering toward a worthy ideal, I would be a much worse boyfriend, a much worse son, a much worse lead. I want to be a leader because I think you can only lead to the degree that you have suffered well and are ready to share that suffering with others. And that's something we all need. That, if you don't find it in jiu-jitsu and you don't find it in something in your early adult life, you may never find it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. We have a question from Auto X. It's a good one. I was going to ask it anyway. So thank you, Auto X, for asking this for me. How does the philosophy of the Tao relate to jiu-jitsu and martial arts? Your book, The Tao of Jiu-Jitsu, you're referencing, someone else was commenting about Daoism. What's your thoughts on that relationship, Chris?
Yeah. So, Daoism, Tao would be the way, right? It's learning how to move in accordance with nature in the most optimal way. And that's twofold, or maybe even threefold. It's learning how to move as efficiently as possible with the stream of life, with the stream of your environment, your community, and with the stream of yourself. Jiu-jitsu is a mirror for who you are. And, we can say whatever we want, we can dress however we want, but when we train, your true self comes forth very quickly. The moment you meet adversity, the moment you put yourself in a compromised position or someone else in a compromised position. And you can't hide on the mat, right? We're all, no matter what you're wearing, you're naked. And jiu-jitsu reveals what you are. And I think that's something where, to move in accordance with the Tao, you need to know what that Tao is for yourself. And jiu-jitsu, at least for me, helps me find that, because you are immediately presented with your own weaknesses very quickly, because you can't hide from your own mind. And I found a lot of value in Eastern teachings. Before I read all those great books, I studied a lot of Alan Watts, who, he brought the Eastern teachings to the West in a very accessible way. And after studying him, then I got into, the Tao Te Ching and all the books of Buddhism and, Hinduism, so on and so forth. And it really is. It's funny. You read the books that you most need right now. And if I could go back, I always study a curriculum, just like in jiu-jitsu. And it's always based off the need I'm currently experiencing. So I'm now trying to balance being a school owner, having my own individual pursuits as a writer in jiu-jitsu, and having an incredibly meaningful relationship, and trying to divvy up the piece of the pie in the best way. And that's a hard thing to do. So I've been going back to a lot of Alan Watts books, a lot of Zen Buddhism, a lot of Taoism, and just trying to connect with, all right, what is it I'm really trying to do? Where is the stream really trying to take me? And am I pursuing the goals that are truly my goals and not the goals of my community or the goals that I used to have? So I think that idea of the Tao it's what we're all trying to do. Personal development is, if we use Jordan Peterson's most fundamental axiom that the world is a forum for action, that means our biggest question is, how should I use my time? And for me, the studies of, Taoism and all the Eastern teachings remind me how to best use my time. And I think to correlate that to jiu-jitsu was just, inevitable.
Yeah, very, very good. And the idea of, you were talking about Alan Watts. One of my favorite books that he wrote was The Taboo of Knowing Who You Are.
Oh, it's a great book.
It's the best, isn't it? And I recommend everybody read it. And I love it because what he's talking about is that when you go on this path, you are going to face a lot of adversity from people around you, because a lot of people aren't willing to go through that legitimate suffering in order to explore the deepest parts of themselves and then actualize their potential. That's hard to do. And a lot of people are not willing to do what's hard, but there's magic in the hardship. There's magic there. There's, like you said, Aladdin's cave is there. And even though it's a taboo to go against the grain and actually think for yourself for a change, it's important that we do that, because the best things in history that have ever been brought forward, the best philosophy, the best building of bridges and buildings and civilization, have all come from great individual minds that stepped outside of the status quo and said, you know what, I'm going to challenge that. Like, look, we can't talk about martial arts without bringing up Bruce Lee. And one thing I loved about him was he wasn't just a face. He wasn't just a Hollywood movie star that was kicking people's ass and sparring with Chuck Norris on screen. He was somebody that brought the Eastern philosophy and the Western philosophy together. So he was raised in the Eastern philosophy, but actually found he had a lot of discrepancies with some of the elements of it, and he came to the West and studied the Western philosophy. He was like, wow, there's the missing pieces are here. And when you read him, you're getting a very unique perspective on both. And I found Alan Watts to be very similar. That's why these guys are eminent people. And you feel that you need to balance out your external relationship life and how you present yourself to the world, your ego and all of that, with your true authentic nature, your true authentic seeking of truth and seeking of meaning and seeking of purpose. And it's that is going to bring happiness. So in a way, it's contradictory to a lot of people that, what, I have to suffer in order to be happy? That doesn't make any sense. And you're like, if you know what you're talking about, it makes the most sense in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny. I think we've all achieved goals in our lives, but working toward the goal is always more fun than achieving it. Whatever it is, whether it was a competition or the writing of a book or whatever, when it's done, that day you feel great. But then you wake up the next day and it's a clean slate and you need to pick up a new load and a burden. And we're always looking for vehicles with which to fulfill that need to be conscientious. And, I'm 31 years old now. I've played a lot of sports, a lot of wear and tear on my body. And it's nice now to direct that conscientiousness toward my humanity and not so much toward, being a better safety in football or being better at guard passing, because that's the most worthwhile pursuit, right? Would be become whatever it is that you are and become to the furthest extent that you are capable. And the only way to do that is to, strive through suffering. And for me, the hardest balance has always been balancing being and becoming, right? So being would be the whole Eastern ideology. Becoming would be the West. So I know I always get caught up in the trap of striving to do more, make the most of my time, mapping out each day. But it's so easy to be disciplined to the point of losing your humanity. And as I get a little bit older and hopefully a little bit wiser, I'm kind of slowing down a little bit and being a little bit more present. And hence, all the Daoism and Buddhism I've been reading lately. But that's a hard balance because you want to become more so you have more to give. But you also want to become more so you are more capable of experiencing the present moment. So it's almost like this wheel. You go through getting better at being for a while, and then you focus on becoming. And you keep going over and over. And they're two very different experiences, but you need both. And that becoming would be the suffering toward a worthy ideal.
Yeah, well said. And you actually, when you're talking about that wheel, you're actually explaining the symbol of Taoism and in the Tao, which is the yin yang. It's a martial arts symbol. It's famous. Everybody's got it on their coffee mugs and their keychains, but do they know what it means? What we're talking about is the balancing between the feminine and the masculine. And we're not talking just about men and women, as a species, but we're talking about the idea of consciousness. Other ancient systems would have had the chalice and the blade, which makes up collectively the Star of David. There's many symbols that relate to this, but I love the fact that the yin yang is circular, and it also has the sine wave in it, which the sine wave is one of the principles of nature, and it's the nature of thinking and the nature of energy. If you get into like guys like Walter Russell and that kind of stuff, and then they've got a little bit of black in the white, a little bit of white in the black, and it's showing that there are two extremes, and you'll play back and forth between those two extremes. But if you can stay in the center of the side and ride that circle and have that balance of a little bit of the light and the dark together, the subconscious, the conscious, and all these different things, then you're achieving harmony and balance as a technical principle in jiu-jitsu. I mean, oh my God, we could talk all day about trying to keep your balance on your feet and someone's trying to sweep you and, kankujutsu and, breaking the balance. And like, this is the whole thing. You're learning how to break down the strength of somebody to get them to a weak spot. Well, then at the same time, if you're defending, you're learning how to counter that and maintain balance. So think of that on a psychological and spiritual level, eh?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, that's why jiu-jitsu and any martial art, but I guess I'm just most versed in jiu-jitsu, is such a good parallel for that experience. It's funny when you were talking about that idea of the yin and yang and that constant balance between the white and the black. We always have a focus in jiu-jitsu, our own personal curriculum. And when I really focus on my guard and my guard's getting great, my guard passing falls away a little bit and you feel sloppy. And then when you do nothing but top game for a while, you go and play guard and it feels a little off. But we're finite creatures. We only have so much time and so much capacity for change. So you really have to decide, where do I want to put my energy, knowing that that's energy I'm taking away from everywhere else. So I think that's why our education is so important, because it lets us most optimally decide where do we want to put that energy. And hopefully it's toward, a worthy goal.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of some of the technical elements, once again, do you have anything on Ricardo Almeida as a person? I mean, to be honest, man, I would love to get a hookup with him as well, eventually to get him on this show. It'd be great to hear from him directly if that
Yeah.
could ever happen. But what's it been like working with him? What's his personality like? What's his teaching style like? Did you learn a lot of concepts that you've brought forward in your writing to from him? You know, what would you say about him?
Yeah, yeah. So I basically learned everything from Professor Almeida, and if not directly from him, from people he taught. He's brilliant. He's an absolutely brilliant guy. He in Brazil was studying engineering before he went on to commit himself to jiu-jitsu. And he's a guy who he could have been great at anything. He fought in the UFC and has won jiu-jitsu world championships, and he could have done that in business. He could have done that anywhere else. He takes a very scientific approach to an art form, which I think is probably pretty rare, balancing that East and West idea. And, he's an inspiring, amazing human being to think that, we have the best MMA fighters, in the world in our camp. We have jiu-jitsu world champions. We have so many satellite schools, myself being one of them. It takes a very special individual to lead a community, and a community of really high achievers and really great human beings. And that's not easy. We just opened up my school in September, and I'm constantly, experiencing new challenges and learning new lessons of leadership. And it's given me such an appreciation for what he has done, because now I've glimpsed a very small amount of this amazing thing he has created. And he's just someone who he holds himself to a really high standard. And just like we talked about, that when a teacher does that, the students can then do that themselves. And it's always been inspiring to me, a guy who's done so much and is so versed. You asked in the beginning of this conversation what his game was. And I don't think he has a game. I mean, I think he's just great at everything. Now that's cliche, but he can play any position just as well as anyone in the world can do it. I think he plays what he chooses to play, but he's always held himself to an incredibly high standard with his fitness, with with his leadership, with his own technical development. That for me, it's just been, no matter how great you are, you still have work to do. I remember when we opened up his second school in Newtown, which I was able to teach there. I was the head instructor for about 4 years. One of the first drives over to Newtown, going along the Delaware River, we were getting ready to paint the school. And I asked him, "Professor, do you think you've mastered jiu-jitsu?" And he looked at me and he was like, "When you think you have it, you've lost it."
Hmm.
And I've always held on to that. And I think he embodies that idea better than anyone. He is constantly trying to be better as someone who's already done so much. And that's leadership by example, and better than I've ever experienced.
That's so great to hear. And I've met people and masters and senseis and teachers in my own life that have those same qualities. I've always looked up to them. They're the champions in my view. They're the people that help me get off my ass in certain areas. And it's important to have that. I mean, as much as it's great to go on your own purely almost like hermetic, isolated life experience,
Yeah.
it's good to draw from the great minds and the people. That's why we quote so many different authors and writers on this show, is that whether they're alive or whether they've come from the past, we're trying to learn from the best. And why are they the best? They're the best because they suffered the most. They're the best because they went and achieved and actualized their potential. And every single one of them would say the same thing. I haven't got it all figured out. I still have to be humble. The more I know, the more I don't know. Would you say that the longer you've been in jiu-jitsu, do you ever feel like the more you've learned, you feel like you've maybe forgotten more jiu-jitsu than you've ever retained or learned,
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny. We just had, I think it might've been Monday, someone asked me a question about this Kimura variation, and I hadn't thought of that or seen that in like 5 years. So I completely forgot it, but it's still in there. I was able to kind of coach him through it, but you can only hold on to so much. And I think for me, I've ventured down jiu-jitsu further than anywhere else, to the point where in being a black belt in jiu-jitsu, I realized that I'm a white belt in every other area of my life. And I didn't realize that until I went far down this road. And having said that, to be honest, I love jiu-jitsu. I've committed the last decade to it, but how much do I really understand jiu-jitsu? I'm not sure. It's this infinite thing that I've glimpsed just a little bit. And the more I see, the more I realize I don't see. There's a great quote. It's something along the lines of, as the island of knowledge increases, so does the shore of ignorance.
Hmm.
And I've experienced that in jiu-jitsu completely. The more we learn, the more we realize just how little we actually know. And that, for me, maybe that's been one of the best lessons in this whole endeavor is, we get so caught up in our own way of viewing the world and our own philosophies. And we have all these confirmation biases where we look for ways to reinforce our mode of living, our worldview. And just to be constantly reminded of my own shortcomings has been one of the best things I've experienced from jiu-jitsu. Certainly has helped me in my relationships, my relationship to myself, to, my amazing girlfriend, my family, my creator, whatever that might be. It's nice to be knocked down a peg or two. And the further I get into jiu-jitsu, I'm constantly reminded of how much further I have to go everywhere else.
Yes, I've had a similar experience in martial arts, and it's so important to have that balance once again of having the confidence, having that self-esteem to know what you're capable of, but to always realize that there's just a universe of knowledge ahead of you that you couldn't even live enough lifetimes to learn it all.
Yeah.
And like I've taken a rather eclectic approach to martial arts where I've studied a variety of disciplines. I'm kind of a jack of all trades, but I like having that objective stance where I can look at many different elements of just movement, human movement of the body, and efficient strategies in different areas of training. And I've carried that over into my philosophical research or any of the things that I'm interested in, and tried to say, okay, it's fun to have read a book and to feel like you know what you're talking about, but the moment you're sitting up there saying you know it all and you've got it all figured out, the universe is going to kick you in the ass. It's going to mount you and choke you out, like,
Yeah.
and that's a principle that's so important for us to remember, is that there's a balance of the humility while you're on this path of knowledge, but also not to a point where you're beating yourself down. You're like, I'm no good. You can almost tell the character of the people you roll with or train with by the way they suffer adversity. So let's say, you always have those training partners where one day you get the best of them, next day they get the best of you, and it's back and forth. And you kind of get that feeling sometimes with people that it's like, they kind of they walk off the mat and they kick a rock and like, oh, damn, and you're kind of like, well, I caused that by getting the best of them. And then I'm like, well, wait, I shouldn't feel bad. They just did that to me last week, and I grew tremendously from that. It's so powerful.
Yeah, those are the training partners we should be most grateful for. And we shouldn't feel bad about that. We should be glad that we created an environment where our friend has the opportunity to face adversity. Because you're right, if that's how they respond to doing poorly in training, that's how they respond to do poorly at work, poorly at school, that's how they respond to being stuck in traffic. Jiu-jitsu does reveal every aspect of your being. So I would never feel bad about that. I think we should feel good that we have done a good job of creating an environment in which people have to suffer well. Maybe that's a real mark of friendship, is not the yes men, but the ones who challenge you and force you to grow.
Yeah, funny bringing up your friends. People have always asked me, as a martial artist, so like, well, if you've been in a lot of fights, you must love fighting then, if you love going to punch the bag and learn how to kill people. And I'm like, well, I don't enjoy fighting people, but I do really enjoy fighting my friends. And people always kind of look back like, what do you mean you love fighting your friends? I'm like, no, I'd rather, instead of fighting some drunk ass at a bar that just wants to, whatever, get his rocks off on you for some reason, then I'd rather go down to the gym and have a very, very good match with somebody that I like and that I know has my well-being in mind, but it's going to put lots of pressure on me. I would much rather that. So I enjoy that. I enjoy martial arts, but I'm not into fighting. What's your experience with that, Chris? Have you been in a lot of altercations in real life fighting? Have you ever enjoyed it? Is it as glorious as the movies? Or what would you say on that versus just training and getting your ass kicked by your friends?
No, yeah. Training with your friends is the best. I've only ever been in 3 fights, and they were amateur MMA fights in Atlantic City in a cage. So I can't really attest to what it's like to have street altercations. That's probably more a product of my environment than my disposition. I think they go hand in hand. I certainly wouldn't search out a fight, but I've always lived in a middle-class neighborhood with minimum altercations, so I never really experienced those things. But yeah, the friends that give you the greatest trouble, the ones that make you suffer the most, and the ones that break you down the most, they're the ones you most respect, and they're your closest relationships. There's always, you have your team within the team. And for me, we called each other the Purple Circle because we were all purple belts at the same time. It was Rob, who I mentioned earlier, and then my good friends Pete and Max. We all came up together. We did the majority of our training sessions together. And it forms a unique bond. I've never experienced anything like that. I would imagine it's something akin, but not nearly as much, to say the military, where you're really dependent upon each other, because when you start increasing your skill, you can only be as good as the problems which are presented to you to solve. So you can really only be as good as your environment. So I've always been incredibly grateful for the people who chose to go on the same path I did and suffered in the same direction. I feel like we're saying suffering a lot. That's a good theme here.
Put it in the title.
Yeah, right. And choose to pursue the same things and to do that together. I think for me, those are the relationships where I could not see those guys for a year. And the moment we see each other, we're right back to where we left off, because there's a deep respect and appreciation for each other that we would not have gotten if we didn't go through those trials and tribulations together.
Yeah, I've had the same experience. It's definitely the blood, sweat, and tears thing. I talk about it a lot, and it forges bonds that are lifelong. It's incredible. Well, let's finish on this question, Chris. I usually ask every martial artist this question. I've trained a long time. I've met a lot of masters, and it seems like for some reason, the longer these people train martial arts, the less they have stories of fighting and violent altercations and whatnot. Do you think that in some way there's an energetic or electromagnetic response that happens that when you go and study something like combat in this kind of way, with this kind of philosophical narrative to it, that you are creating an immunity in a way to attracting energy that would bring those conflicts to you? Or do you think that's just a bunch of wishy-washy magic, hocus pocus, mumbo jumbo?
Man, I think there's something to that. I think egos feed off of egos, and it really is a volley, and it does take two people to engage in that kind of practice. And that will go back to a Taoist idea, right? You don't meet resistance with resistance. You let it flow through you. And that can be something as simple as eye contact on the street, the posture you're holding, a conversation. When you no longer think you're made of glass, when you recognize, your durability, you lose the sense and the need to want to prove that. Right? So for me, the toughest dudes I know are the kindest guys I know, and the guys least likely to fight, because we are primates who have that need and that urge to let out aggression, no matter who you are. And jiu-jitsu gives us the decompression room, right? To let all that out in a safe way. And it gives us the confidence to not fight. I would imagine, I don't know, I would imagine most of those altercations stem from insecurity. But when you're secure, you don't need to prove to others how secure you are.
Oh, well said, man. Well said. Well, I don't want to take up more of your time. I'm sure you've got some people to triangle choke and stuff like that. But well, maybe just give us your website and tell us again about the book projects you got coming up.
Sure, yeah. So the website is matakasbjj.com, and the book project. So I just finished 5 rules for white belts, and that should be out either the end of this month or early next month. And then I'm currently on the second draft of On Teaching, which would be the exact opposite end. I wrote a book, and all the books I write are just me trying to learn. I think the best way to learn is to have a conversation. And for me, the best way to think has been to write. So whenever I'm wrestling with an idea, I write about it. And for me, the next one about teaching is sort of a justification of my life choices. Why was it a worthy choice to devote myself to teaching jiu-jitsu? And that book is my attempt to articulate that to myself. And then in so doing, remind all of us, like yourself, David, who teach, that we do a really special thing. And I think we take it for granted. I think we very often don't realize how valuable a role we play in society, and that the more sincerely we take up what we do, the better the world will be. And all of the books are just an attempt to better understand that jiu-jitsu is a vehicle for personal development. And if you hop on, it can take you really far.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I wish you all the best success and all of that with your books, with your dojo, a new training facility. That's amazing. Next time I'm in New Jersey, man, I'm going to come down, and I'd love to participate in one of your classes and do some training. If you're ever out in the West Coast of Canada, you're more than welcome to hook up with me. And I just want to thank you, Chris, for your time, your excellent commentary on this subject. It's great to have people on that are very well versed in this on a deep level. So I highly recommend those that have tuned in, go and check out Chris's work. Go check out his books. They're incredibly profound, whether you're a martial artist or not. And thanks again for your time, Chris, and for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you, David, for the great conversation. Man, for all you do. You're making the world a better place. So thank you for all you do.
Oh, thanks, man. Cheers. And thanks to all those that tuned in. I know I picked a rather odd time of day, so we didn't get tons today, but I know we're going to have lots of subsequent viewers. But thank you for your amazing questions and comments. And we'll catch you all back here very soon for another edition of The Way of the Truth Warrior. Cheers.